Bienvenidas and welcome to Latina Literati, the channel for Latinas and the Latina friendly. In this episode, we're going to New Orleans, and I want to especially dedicate this video to Haiti. Why? Because in my reading in preparation for our trip to New Orleans, which was amazing, I learned a lot about the connections between the Caribbean and Louisiana. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why Louisiana and the Caribbean histories are so intertwined. First is that the French had this thought, oh, we're going to do what the Spanish did. We're going to go and take all of the gold and silver and build an empire. And they thought they could, starting in places like La Rochelle in France, to go over the St. Lawrence River and then go down to the Great Lakes and come down through the Mississippi. In fact, the first French who actually arrived in what is now Louisiana were actually French Canadians, and they had paddled in canoes all the way down the Mississippi. Pretty amazing in terms of the distances covered. France said, well, we can use what they called Saint-Domingue, what we call Haiti today, as their base of operations. And so they sent about 30,000, what was then considered the absolute top fighting force in the world, Napoleon's army, to put down the rebellion there. And the great Haitian general Toussaint Louverture led 500,000 free people against supposedly the greatest fighting force at that time on earth, in any case, and won. And in fact, the last letter that Napoleon's brother-in-law sends to him, once he is tricked Toussaint Louverture and has him in chains, is, you will never ever regain this island. Just give up your dreams of an empire in what they considered the New World. So it was really the Haitian rebellion which squashes France's dreams of copying Spain and plundering lots of silver and gold in this continent. Then Thomas Jefferson offers to buy Louisiana and much more in the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million. And Napoleon says, well, if I can't build an empire, I better just sell the real estate. And that's what he did. So that's the first reason why Louisiana exists today, really because of the Haitian Rebellion and that putting a squash on the French idea of an empire on this continent. The second reason is that during all of the upsets in the Caribbean, literally once New Orleans is established, and even where New Orleans is today, was traditional indigenous land. Lots and lots of indigenous groups still exist today in Louisiana, like the Huma, the Choctaw, many amazing groups. Some recognized, some not, because remember, indigenous groups exist whether or not the federal government says they do. So even what is the famous Congo Square, where the enslaved people would gather to play music, was originally a trading area of the indigenous people. So really interesting link. When those first French Canadians arrive, they're even told by the indigenous people, there are cimarrones, aquí hay cimarrones, which was the Spanish word for those who had freed themselves. And so there was a settlement of freed people in Louisiana even before the French arrived, and they wanted nothing to do with the Europeans. They would trade with the indigenous, they intermarried with the indigenous people, they wanted nothing to do with the Europeans because they knew the Europeans represented slavery, obviously. So the second connection between the Caribbean and Louisiana then is that during all of these rebellions, several thousand, something like 3,000 Haitians arrive in New Orleans. And so about a third were enslaved peoples, and the other half a group were freed peoples, and some were slaveholders. So again, New Orleans is really settled by Haitian refugees, and also from some of the other Caribbean islands. That's when you first get to even the amount of like 10,000 people living there. Is only after people have arrived from different Caribbean islands as upheavals occur there. Also interesting, I didn't realize that, like Australia, New Orleans or Louisiana becomes kind of a penal colony, and so France wants to get rid of anyone who's like not working or in jail or accused of any crime, including the oldest profession on earth. And so they send these boats from La Rochelle in France to Louisiana to populate the state when they're trying to set up a colony there. Most of them will die on the way because it's freezing, it's cold, and they're not given proper nutrition. So the third connection between New Orleans and the Caribbean is the music. So when you look at the drums that are used in Congo Square originally by the enslaved peoples and those, for example, produced in Matanzas, Cuba, they're almost identical. The musicology or the musical history of the Caribbean is literally transferred to New Orleans, and it will become one of the bases of what we call jazz today. So that music, so special from Africa through the Caribbean to New Orleans, is something that is so identifiably North American, and yet it is truly African. So I say thank you to Haiti for everything that you have given the world. And we owe Haiti so much. So it's very hurtful to see how this government is currently continuing to mistreat the Haitians. But Haiti, you are strong, and we all know. So Louisiana is an interesting place, and New Orleans is just a mélange, as they'd say, or just a mixture of all sorts of people from all over the world. We spent the first day in the warehouse district. That's where we spent most of the time, but we were in the French Quarter and we went to other places as well. Going to some wonderful restaurants and meeting old friends. Also taking a look at the destruction that Ida and the climate crises continues to unfold there. As soon as you come out of the tourist area, you see the suffering, just mountains of garbage, debris everywhere, all of the houses with blue tarps, and it keeps raining, so you can't put on new roofs. If everything is wet, it has to dry out. So our wishes and hearts also go out to all of those who are suffering, continue to suffer in New Orleans and all of the Gulf states with the climate crises. So we need to address that quickly. So get on the phone to your leaders. As you can tell by my circumstance, I was in a slight collision. The other driver drove through a red light, totaled my car, and so I've had lots of time to read. So today I'm going to just talk about a couple of books. The first one, Cinco Días en Octubre, is a mystery, and really what it shows is how it was brother against brother in the Spanish Civil War. Like so many civil wars around the world, you had those who were defending the Spanish Republic and those who supported the military fascist coup. And you'll remember that the Lincoln Brigade here in the United States went to fight on the side of the Republicans in Spain, which are not the same as the Republicans here. This book is about a policeman who was in the Republican police force in Barcelona, and he is sent to Valle de los Caídos. Valle de los Caídos is a place where the phalangists, literally out of the prisoners, mostly political prisoners that were there, carved out of a mountain, a place where the leaders and the founders of the Falangist Party are buried, along with the dictator Francisco Franco. I mean, it is a very impressive place, but you can feel the suffering that brought it about. basically slave labor. So he has spent time there, and he is asked by someone in the government close to the dictator to find out who killed his nephew and why. So I won't tell you anymore, but Cinco Días en Octubre, really fun read, easy read, it was a good read. The next one, again in preparation for New Orleans, I really wanted to get a sense, because I know very little about modern music and things. So this book, Sidney Bechet, one of the giants of jazz, it's an autobiography and really gives you a sense also of the continuing connection between jazz musicians and Paris, because he actually lived in Paris, and the acceptance of perhaps musicians here that weren't allowed even to stay in hotels or to ride transportation are completely accepted in Paris. And so always interesting to see the back and forth, the flow of musical talent to Paris and to Europe. Next, A Sense of the World. This was an inspirational book because it's the story of James Holmes. The first person from whom we have a travel log is a man by the name of Ibn Battuta. He was born in Morocco and literally goes around the known world, comes back, and then writes about it. And so that was actually a nickname that was given to me because I love to travel. So this is the second person who goes around the known world. The difference is that this man, James Holmes, was blind. And he was blinded by a disease to the optical nerves in his 20s and literally goes around the world. And it's amazing to see how, because he was one-sighted, he can immediately identify all sorts of things by his hearing and by his sense of smell. It's amazing how he gets through places like Siberia and the jungles of South America. And so it was a really inspirational book. If you're complaining about a plane being delayed or something and you literally are on your own in the middle of nowhere, trusting people that you are meeting that you truly can't look into their eyes, it takes a lot of courage. And he was a very courageous man. And in fact, they say that there are places, I think there's a river in Niger named after him. And there was also a couple of places off the coast of Africa that Portugal held, and there were a couple of places named after him as well, just because he was there with the first Europeans to arrive, and was actually quite good at because he was blind, he was never seen as a threat, and he was able to negotiate on behalf of the Europeans far better than they were. So it's really interesting how different cultures see people who may not be sighted, and how they're more accepted, for example, as go-betweens, and how they're somewhat protected. So that was an interesting historical novel, and I completely recommend it. Okay, so the next one is The Soul of an Octopus. And when my mom gave me this book, I kind of thought, I don't know. I mean, I love octopuses. They're actually not called octopi. I found out in the book they're octupuses, but the plural. But they're not only intelligent, but incredibly sensitive. And even though they live very brief lives, they have shown us a lot of things. The relationship between human beings and octopuses has grown, and we've learned a lot from them. How sensitive they are, and that they have a sense of humor. So pretty hard to eat them after that. But in any case, I really recommend it. It was a good book. And then The World That Made New Orleans is where I got a lot of the information I'm sharing with you. It really goes back to the first indigenous settlements, and there have been homes of indigenous people found in the New Orleans, Louisiana area that date back to 400 AD. Fisheries and all of the different things that the indigenous survived on, they then teach the Europeans. I think it's also interesting to note that the first enslaved peoples to arrive are from the group, because in those days obviously the current nations didn't exist, Senal-Gambian group, and they actually brought rice and seeds in their hair so that they could survive. And so the rice fields that are currently in Louisiana are thanks to the enslaved peoples. And there's so many things that the indigenous and the enslaved peoples brought to Louisiana that allowed the Europeans to take their labor and take their ideas and really found a society that is there. So I highly recommend it, especially if you're going to New Orleans. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. We'd love to hear from you, the types of videos that you'd like to see from us. And I wish you always health and happiness y mucho, mucho amor. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. And we look forward to bringing you more adventures and lots of books in the future. Gracias.